and welcome to the talk. So thank you for attending, and it's great to see so many people on this call, and I know that there's a lot on, and it's always appreciated, particularly with so many other events on that you're attending tonight. A warm welcome to the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. We're now about halfway through, and this is my talk on visualizing a talk. But before I get going, just to remind you of a few important things. The Agile 20 Reflect Festival, as it says here in the slide, it's been made possible entirely by volunteers who've all donated their time. Donations are welcome, but are entirely optional. So there's links there. The slide deck will be sent out afterwards, and the slide deck and the recording of the meetup will be available in the archives. So yes, if you want to make a donation, it's entirely optional. The link's there. And of course, very importantly, we want all the events to agree and adhere to the important code of conduct so that they're open and safe. Now, that's important because we want to create a safe environment where people are not worried about anything adverse happening, and they are able to share openly and freely without consequences. So the whole festival is driven by this important code of conduct. If you do see anything or anything's concerning you or causing you a problem, then the link there is there. And of course, you can go to the Agile 20 Reflect website and search for it there as well. So by all means, if there's something that's causing you a problem, get in touch with the festival via the link there. Reminder as well, it's a month-long festival. We're about halfway through. There's many events still to happen, and it's open to the end of February. So we're very much encouraging a diverse range of subjects across the festival in different languages from different continents and different perspectives, people who are new to Agile and people who have been doing it for many years, lightning talks and full talks. So by all means, browse the site, self-select, and sign up for any sessions that appeal to you. The entire festival is free deliberately, so it's all open. And of course, if you can't make any or there's a conflict, then the talks will be available on the archive in due course. So now we're into the talk. So this is what I call the knowledge canvas talk. And it's a practice that's hopefully going to help people structure their talks, visualize their talks. And it's a little bit like an alternative to mind maps, but it gives you the context of how this came about and the problem it's trying to solve. So knowledge canvas, a visualization practice. Now that's my details. I'm Craig Coburn. I'm an Agile coach based in Edinburgh in Scotland. My contact details are there below. I'm available on at Silicon Glen on Twitter. And the hashtag for this particular talk is KCanvas. And of course, there's the hashtag for the whole festival is My Agile 20 Reflect. So by all means, socialize this, talk about it on social media. It's great to connect to people. First of all, so the introduction to this particular talk. It's a visualization practice for organizing content and supporting structured learning, which could be a conference talk like this, could be you're delivering training, could be a meetup. I do touch on usability. It's not really a talk on usability though, or even on PowerPoint, of which I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but I try my best. Or even on slide design, although again, I'm trying my best there. But again, if there's anything that you think I can improve on to get it more usable, disabled friendly, accessible, all these things are important. So I do welcome feedback on the content of the talk and the design of the talk too. So there'll be feedback opportunities at the end, and there's also a feedback opportunity for the conference as a whole. Now, who do I think is the key audience for this? Well, people like you, students, people who engage in learning, go to webinars, seminars, conferences. There's also people like me who speak at conferences and meetups, trainers and coaches. And I'll show later on how this has been applied in a couple of those circumstances. But also anybody who's actually interested in being a speaker. I mean, despite being a speaker at this massive festival, it was only 2 years ago I really did my first solo conference talk. So I've been through that journey myself, and I kind of struggled a little bit with thinking, is this going to be okay? Is it going to be confusing? Is it the right order? So again, I put this out there to try and help people with a little bit of a format, and I'm drawing on things that come from TED as well and what they talk about too, as well as, of course, anyone else with an interest. So it's kind of open there, broad audience, but some instances in which you might find this useful. So as I said, preparing and delivering any content for learning. So again, a meetup, a conference talk, topics at work, that sort of thing. Or even, interestingly, there's a blank canvas that you can use if you're watching a talk and the speaker gives you the blank canvas to use. So you can use it when watching to fill in things as you go and provide a little bit of bare bones structure to get you started. As well as, of course, I started off talking about this talk as it's visual facilitation for people who can't draw, but I'm not wanting to put down that particular skill set at all. But really, if you are a graphic facilitator, then this kind of skeleton format can at least provide a starter for how to structure your drawing to get the drawing to make sense in line with the way the talk's delivered, as well as, of course, conference handouts. In the days when we used to meet face-to-face, this could form a conference handout to, again, help people sketch and learn in their own particular way. And the other thing that's important is when you've seen a conference or topic, you might want to go back to it and revise what you've learned, find the key points, and especially for videos. Now that in the last year, a lot of meetups have gone online, a lot of conferences have gone online, the amount of online content has shot up enormously. And sitting through an entire video to get the key points is quite time consuming. So if there's structure to that video and there's a summary, then it can help you revise more quickly and scan more quickly. Is this the right video for you? So again, I've done that sort of intro. I'm now going to go into, so what really is the problem here? Why bother with this talk at all? Well, the origins of this was thinking actually about the inclusivity of talks. I found originally when I was going to conferences and they were 2 or 3 days long, I was presented with some very talented speakers doing some brilliant talks, but they all followed massively different formats. And by the end of 3 days, I was feeling a bit like, well, I've experienced a lot of content, but I'm struggling to remember it all. And that feeling of, could it just be more inclusive? And it started getting me thinking about the inclusivity part of this. And I started to learn about neurodiversity and autism, and recognizing that people on the spectrum, and I'll come to that in a minute, actually prefer structure and for it to be clear and simple and straightforward. And I went, well, how do we then get that clear structure to be more obvious? So that was where the thinking came from. But also just thinking about, the amount of digital content out there has now grown enormously. There is so much digital content. So how do we start to structure and organize the content that is digital? Because there's so much more of it now in terms of filtering that and looking for the great stuff. So thinking about clear structure, as well as thinking about inclusivity and neurodiversity, we want people to be able to participate in conferences and get the most out of them, irrespective of whether they are disabled or not, or on the neurodiverse scale or not, or whatever their learning styles are. So this is a little bit about thinking about learning styles as well. I did a little bit of research on neurodifference, that actually the ACAS, as a body about employment in the UK, recognises that around about 1 in 7 people in the UK have a neurodifference, and there's some of them listed below there. Now, of course, there's also about 1 in 20 that have a disability. Some people with a neurodifference wouldn't think of them as disabled. Some disabilities aren't on the neurodifference scale. But again, there's 2 communities there, of which the more we can think about these different communities and try to be inclusive towards them, the better it is for them. And as we've learned a lot of the time, when we cater for people who have a disability or some disadvantage, it actually improves it for everybody. And as an example, if like a restaurant provides a ramp, so a disabled person in a wheelchair can access the restaurant, then of course that ramp's also available for anybody pushing a pram. So there's lots of advantages for catering for disability. One of the web standards is specifically for the disability standards for web design, means that the web page needs to align to a defined standard. And in doing so, it then helps everybody. It helps SEO, it helps tooling, and so on. This is the more general data on learning as such, which really made me kind of really pay attention to this. And I recognized a lot of my experience in this, in that sometimes just when you look at somebody giving a PowerPoint presentation, it may well be quite light in content, and the emphasis is then on you listening to the speaker. But the data tells us that only 26% of students actually preferred that style. So although a lot of the traditional teaching around PowerPoint is the PowerPoint is just your visual aid, is light on content, listen to the speaker, actually we should be careful that listening isn't always everybody's preferred style. And of course, the data at the bottom then from Harvard Business Review is, of course, people forget quite a lot of what they have just learned. It's okay, don't worry, there's no tests here, but that's the data that Harvard is telling us. And of course, it's dropping to 25% after 2 months. So it's quite concerning. So the ability to revise is actually quite important. Now, flicking over to TED, TED believes in shortish talks, around about 20 minutes max as well. But interestingly, from this book on TED Talks, it emphasizes that for a TED Talk, it's the same as for a play, novel, and a movie. It's having a through line which effectively tells the story of the talk. So therefore, with that story, and people are really good at remembering stories, rather than just a whole lot of facts, if you have a story and it ties up, it actually sits better with the audience. And this has come about through data and through the extensive talks that they have done. Now, some existing formats for visualization and talks, there's McKinsey Pyramid, there's also mind maps, which in effect are a bit of a hierarchy rolled up. I'll show examples of these in a moment. And also, neither of these formats really equates to time, or what I call a multi-connected knowledge graph, in which lots of things are connected to lots of things in graph format. And because of the increase in video content, connecting things to time is mattering more, because we've got videos and they are time-based and they have a start and a finish. So trying to think about, you have a linear format, which is the talk or face-to-face in a room, and how do you take that mind map and equate it back to the different parts of that time segment when the talk was given. So that was one part of it. And also when we learn, this isn't a free ride, right? So there's 3 parts to learning there. One is, how difficult is the subject anyway? And the other one is the extraneous load, which is the unnecessary difficulty added because the presenter is not given it in a clear way. And earlier in my career, I encountered lots of clever people, but sometimes they really struggled to get those complex ideas taught in a clear and concise way. And it really matters. But the germane load is the important one. And this is where mind maps actually work, because they place an appropriate amount of small load on your learning, in order then that you've done a little bit of work to help the learning to embed. Rather than just sitting there listening to somebody talk, a little bit of work actually goes a long way to helping you learn. And the American Psychological Association adds this, would say, if you do process your notes and do some effort on them, it does help you. So some different practices that are already out there. Concept maps are used in training from the back of the room. I've touched a little bit on mind maps. I've also mentioned visual facilitation, which is drawing the talk as you go. And again, great skill, but it's perhaps difficult for some people to draw and focus both at the same time. And Cornell Notes, which have been around for quite a long time, and show the idea of writing top to bottom on a page and summarize it on the left. And I've highlighted these 2 in bold because they're the main areas in which I draw from. This practice hasn't come out of thin air. I've drawn a little bit on concept maps and Cornell Notes to kind of pull this together. So there's concept maps which show the fact that knowledge connects in lots of different ways, and we want flexibility. And there was actually concept maps where the inspiration originally for mind maps. The inventor of mind maps, Tony Buzan, took a concept map, placed the concept in the middle, and built everything around it. But in doing so, it's a series of trees, and you sometimes slightly lose the flexibility that you get with a concept map. Touching on a few other kind of formats that are out there, there's books. This is more of a timeline format, which is quite, are building that as well, about going from left to right and seeing what happens at each point. So drawing on some theories and practices that are already out there, as well as there's lots of tools for taking notes. This has become quite a growing area too. I use OneNote a lot, but there's lots of tools out there for just taking notes too. So here's the canvas, and I'll talk you through a little bit of how I reverse engineered a talk to produce the canvas the first time around, and then I'll show you a couple of examples later on. So it was actually last week in the festival I did this talk on complexity. There's a couple of links to it there, older versions, but I took that complex talk, which was my first conference talk, and said, well, to be fair, I taken on quite a lot to that talk, which was covering a lot of complex topics about strategy, Brexit, complexity theory, mapping, and I had to cover that in 40 minutes. So I really wanted to be quite clear about covering it in the right way, in the right order, systematically, and telling the story without losing people. If I was to just write down some of the things in that particular talk as notes, it would look like this, and there's a lot going on there, so it's easy to get lost if you're just jotting things down. But what I did was I joined those up in the order in which I spoke about them in that particular talk, as an idea for what is the emergent structure in that talk. I did have a structure in mind, but actually then having the talk and reverse engineering it led me to discover that some of the parts of the talk weren't quite in the perfect order. So using this practice, flagged that up, and then I re-engineered the talk based on this. So in looking at the talk in timeline order, I could see that there was some clear groupings, which are then labeled. So a bit like this talk, I gave an introduction, I articulated what the problem was, articulated there what the solution was, I talked people around how to use the solution, I gave people a summary, and then I gave them some pointers to ongoing learning. So really that 6-stage process was the format for that talk, the manner by which the talk was delivered. And the 16 placeholders there are just simply pointers to remind me. But now I don't need those, because now we've got the structure for the talk. If I take that flow and then spread it out as a linear timeline, I've now got those 6 areas in which I used to deliver the talk. And now this is like the canvas in which I can draw upon by taking those 6 topics and then realizing, of course, the meat of the talk is the bit in the middle. I don't want to spend a 1/6 of the time doing an intro or a 1/6 of the time doing the summary. I really want the meat in the middle to have the most content. So I resized it in line with the amount of content I would expect in each section. And of course, this can also be a marker for the amount of time and that you're allocating to each part of the talk. Then with that, I turned it into a canvas so you can start to draw on it. And the bit at the top is from Cornell Notes, that's your summary, and the bit underneath is the content. So that's the format of the canvas, and it goes from left to right. The bottom bit is showing you the mechanism by which the story is told, and the blank bit in the middle is for you to fill in with the content. And now when I give that talk, after each of the 6 parts, I do a small 5 to 10 second recap to refresh people what I've covered in that talk. And so after each part of the talk, fill it in and say, right, we've covered this, that's the summary. And then by the end of the talk, there's the talk on a page. So they can look across the key points at the top to say what was the summary of each section, and they can look across the brown bits in the middle, the peachy bits to say what was the detail that then supported that. But like the concept map, you can connect up knowledge in lots of different ways. So then this is now how the story is told. I've got the mechanism of the story at the bottom, and I've got the key concepts and how they relate and develop across time for that particular talk. And now when I introduce that slide in that talk, people are quite intrigued as to this, and they find it quite useful because it helps them to remember as I introduce a number of topics along the way. You can, if you want, tick it to show that you've understood it, or if you're revising things, that's just an optional extra. But the extra bit here is because it's color coded at the bottom, when you then see it on a video, you can then use the color coded mark at the bottom to get the timestamp. So then you can put your own markers in and go back quickly to the right part in the talk easily because it's indicated with the right color. And that way you're not having to sit through the whole talk or scan up and down and go, where was that bit? Where's the example? All right, there it is. It's the light blue bit. You just scan up and down, the color changes in line with that thumbnail. You've got there really quickly. So this is like building the mind map for the digital age. It's color coded to help you reach the right content quickly, and you can create your own timestamps and bookmarks with the minimum of effort. So a few templates here. This is the blank one that I just showed you a minute ago. You can take that away, use it. It's Creative Commons. But after giving this talk as a quick talk, a few months ago, it was about a 10-minute concept talk as to what do you think of this idea. A training company at the bottom there thought this was really good. They're now using it. It's in the YouTube at the link there, and they used this format to in their talk on being ready for Agile. So this is how they chose to deliver their talk. And then they structured the talk in that way with a connected sequence. So they found it quite useful. And they're very experienced trainers, but you can see it in action there. And the other time I've given this talk, so this is the first time I've given this talk in free, but I gave it at a conference. And at that conference, somebody said, this looks really useful. And they changed the format because the format's not rigid. They just had 4 stages rather than 6. But having that format then gave them a framework in which to put in the content. So for them, they were talking about, they were wanting to change their PhD, and they just wanted to explain that to the university in a clear way. So that was their talk about. So people have really embraced this and gone off and come back with examples and explained that it was really quite useful to them. But thinking back to TED and what makes a successful TED talk, now, so it says there, the most successful TED speaker in terms of views is Sir Ken Robinson, and he has a structure. And his structure is introduction, which is getting settled, and then he says what he's going to cover, and then he says, why does it matter? And then he talks about the main concepts, and then practical implications and conclusion. So that's his format, and he's had 90 million views, and he's the most viewed TED speaker in what is quite a competitive landscape. And that's basically his 5 key things and the mechanism by which he delivers his talks. It's in the book, and it's 5 sections, and there's the 5 sections written out as a list. Well, if you want to use Sir Ken's format, I'm not going to guarantee you get 90 million TED views, but that 5-step format for him is, well, there it is. That's Sir Ken's format. But just before I got onto that, the important reminder there from Dan Pink is it has to be your talk. Don't just use someone else's format. Think about what's going to work for your audience. Now I've got Ken's format, which is 5. I've used 6. The early one was 4. This is very flexible, but the beauty is the flexibility. You work out the mechanism by which the story will be told, then you fill in the content, and then when you have that content, you can then use that to drive what slides you need to prepare or build, such that they then align to telling the story in a compelling way. So that's the templates and examples. Now just a bit of a quick wrap up. Again, I'm using this zoom in and zoom out to again remind you the structure of the talk and where we're at. Some takeaways for speakers, of course. I did mention that this is potentially useful for speakers. If you have that blank format, you can put post-its in there. It helps you sort out that content, as I said earlier. It helped me with my talk to make sure it was told in a sensible way. You can use one of these per day if it's a multi-day course. That might help you. And again, it's better for what I would call knowledge graph, where things don't just kind of one thing flows onto the next. There may be that there's multiple connections in multiple directions. So, I mean, think about like Wikipedia. If I looked up Edinburgh and Edinburgh Castle, say in Wikipedia, it would point me to other content about Edinburgh, other content about castles, content about history. I mean, knowledge is just like that. It points off and connects in lots of different directions, rather than just necessarily being a hierarchical tree like Darwin's classification of life. Again, for visual facilitation, if you have that blank format, you can then draw into that in a way that's going to make sense. You're not going to run out of room, you know what's coming up next and so on. And also just handouts for delegates if they wanted to fill this out. And hopefully we'll get back to face-to-face meetings one day. But rather than them taking notes, I've been at conferences where I see people writing. Well, if I give you the structure, it's now aiding you so that you don't have to take quite so many notes and work so hard as to the structure. But a few more as well. It's a sort of a Kanban format, so you could perhaps use a Kanban tool to take advantage of this, or a whiteboarding tool as well. It does provide that structure for delegates. And again, I pointed out earlier about the color codes can help you find content in video more quickly. But of course, you can still use pictures and drawings if you want. You're not limited to post-its or square things. And again, that putting in an appropriate load, if you want to use pictures and drawings and that helps you, then of course, you know, that's perfectly fine. And the PowerPoint zoom is this zooming in and out, where you use PowerPoint to show you the key areas in the talk, and that's what I'm using here as well. So a bit more research on this if you wanted to follow up again. I did watch the TED Talk on Avoiding Death by PowerPoint, which is a really useful read. I have sat through quite a few boring, content-heavy text, small PowerPoints, and it's always a useful skill to have. But also thinking about neurodiversity and how dyslexics like to learn and how they're good. There was a talk on the dyslexia coaches at Agile 20 Reflect. It's in the archives. I would encourage you to take a look at that if you're more interested in this, as well as just thinking more broadly about inclusivity, about things like what typography to use. I've gone for a particular font here. Arial and Helvetica are generally considered to be easier to read. What colors and contrast and icons make it more accessible. There's lots of detail there. And also just using simple, clear, plain language. And say there, like the links have the standard link color. So just make things simple so people don't have to work too hard to decipher what's on your slides. And as well, again, I'm not the biggest fan of PowerPoint. There are other tools available. I'm exploring these to make sure I don't spend quite so much time doing PowerPoint. But yeah, be open-minded. There are lots of tools to do this. And also they also have accessibility tests within them often. If you want to read a bit more, there's a couple of books here. Again, the talk will be available on the archive as will the slides. And also this tool at the bottom, if you are a speaker and you're wanting to keep to time and not overrun your slot, this tool is particularly useful because it does allow you to segment the talk in the way that I've said, but it keeps you straight so that you keep in line with your time box. So a little bit of feedback as well. I did touch on a couple of examples, but this is somebody with dyspraxia who actually felt it really helped them. They went away and did that PhD example, and they just thought for them that was really good. Yeah, it aligned to how their brain worked. And the training company, as I say, they thought it was a useful sense-making approach. So it's a fairly new topic, but I'm very keen to get lots of feedback, especially from people with, on the neuro spectrum or with disabilities. It's a key interest of mine. I really want to be as accessible and inclusive as possible. So I'm very keen to get feedback on what you think of the talk. And that's broadly it. So thank you. Just as we're winding up though, a couple of things. Oh yes, it's over to you for the feedback and Q&A. There's the code. So I have opened up a Menti for you to scan. And the code is there and also on the next page as well. So please, in line with getting feedback and figuring out how does it work for you. By all means, scan that and type in the code and give me feedback. And then just one last thing. That's this talk. So I'll leave that open, because the other thing about this talk is that whilst I'm now doing the Q&A, you have the talk in front of you. So you didn't have to necessarily remember or take notes. I've got it there in front of you. Feel free to ask me about anything on the page, or indeed anything else. So is there any questions in the chat coming up? Scrolling up and down. Thanks. The Menti code, which I did move, it's also on this page too. I don't have space for the QR code, but it's up there at the top right-hand corner. Just go to menti.com and type in those 7 digits. I can see the comments in the chat. It's great. If you wanted to ask me a question, that'd be great. But does anybody got any questions? If not, I'll leave that up. And again, of course, you can fill out the survey. Or also in the meetup afterwards, put a link to the broader Agile 20 Reflect survey form as well. And thank you for the compliments. It's great to get the positive feedback. If there isn't anything else, then I don't know if anybody's wanted to talk, but I'm not hearing anything. But if there isn't anything else, then thank you. I really appreciate the feedback. And I look forward to meeting up with you at other Agile 20 Reflect events.
Craig, I've got one question.
Okay.
If you mind. Yeah. First of all, I'd really appreciate the talk. I've learned such great valuable knowledge that even I can use it in my project management methodology and to introduce such great useful tool at my work. The questions for someone to get in depth and learning about these tools and details, what's your best recommendation for someone really quite interested to go deep and use that tools?
Well, for this tool, what I did at the outset is just, you could practice by reverse engineering somebody's talk to say, what's the mechanism by what they're doing it. I've tried to keep this quite simple and lightweight. And when I showed that example, it was somebody had just taken it and said, what's the four parts? And if you think about, just telling a story, I mean, even with a talk like this, the intro and the wrap up might just be kind of given, but what is the mechanism by which you believe it's useful for somebody to learn? You can try it out with a 10-minute talk or explain to them in 5 minutes. What's the prerequisite knowledge? What's the concept? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? I mean, practices like training from the back of the room, which I mentioned earlier, use this format of explain the theory and then get the person to do the thing. Obviously, this is lined up largely for somebody talking, but you can adapt this to an actual workshop and say, I'm going to talk about this first, and then I'm going to give you a simple example, and you do this, as a workshop, and then perhaps we'll scale it up and do a bigger team example. It would work in that sort of format too. And practices like training from the back of the room can give you guidance on how to layer up your learning such that it supports embedding. And of course, the other thing you can do as well is if it's a particularly long one, if you're giving like a training session over a day, you can also put into the talk events like, or do a poll at this point, or have a break here. And that way you can see visually, is there enough breaks, changes for the audience? Because particularly when it's all online, people's attention starts to wane a little bit after about 20 minutes. But after about 40 minutes, they want a break. So you can use this to just show not just how the story is told, but to make sure the breaks are spaced and there's suitable interactivity as well. Does that help you?
Yep, definitely. Yep. since I'm delivering like a training program for a group of people, so I'm thinking of like changing all my whole presentation into a knowledge camping talk, like rather than just having like a plain text like slides.
Mm-hmm. And you can see from this,
Yes,
I've got a 30-minute talk on a page. I mean, what other formats would work in terms of it shows the timeline, it shows the summary, so you can scan that quickly, and it's shown the detail too. And I've put in a few quite amateurish drawings, because that's not really my chief skill set. Is there anyone else wanted to chat and ask a question?
Hi, Craig. Archana here.
Hi.
I want to say thanks. This is brilliant. And I can see that in terms of applications, it can also be useful in, for example, various forms of work planning. For example, for authors to write a book, kind of spacing the amount of weightage you put for the content and stuff. So yeah, thanks for that comprehensive work.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking as well about, I mean, it would work if you're actually writing a novel and introducing characters and layering things up. But even just from writing a reference book, to say, like, you want to grab the person with the intro or the acknowledge or the foreword to say, why read this book? There's lots of books out there. Draw them in and get them interested, and just confirm that this is the right book for them. Because, often, when I'm setting out at the outset of a talk, this is the audience, it allows the audience to self-select. And if they're not that target audience, then of course they're still welcome to attend, but making it clear who the key likely beneficiaries of the talk are going to be.
Indeed, yeah. Thanks for that.
Is there anyone else?
Hi, Craig. Yes,
Hi.
This is Louisa. I have as well a question. Let's say I would like to give a presentation that is about 1 hour, but I don't want to deliver it as a big bang, let's say. I would like to introduce some breaks, not breaks, depending on, let's say, where the audience interest is. I would like to expand that area while I am actually delivering the presentation or the conversation. I want to make it a little bit more conversational rather than just delivering it. How would you do that? I love your template, and I think it's absolutely amazing. But how would you do that? You will create some buffers for this?
Yeah, I mean, each of these things at the bottom could be, putting a conversation placeholder, for instance, and it might just be short. So there's some data to suggest after about 20 minutes, people want a change or a break or put in a poll. And obviously with TED, they say that around 20 minutes is kind of enough to convey even quite a complex thing. But you could, for instance, in this talk, what I could do is after the intro and the context, you could just have a short one that says, let's have a discussion about have you had this sort of problem, right? And just open it out to that sort of dialogue at the end of that section, because then that act of talking about it helps to consolidate the knowledge and gets people to think about it from their point of view, which then you can then draw in later on in the talk. But I could see that these sections could form quite useful natural breaks for that conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because in some of the cases, let's say we know well our audience. Let's say I am a Scrum Master or whatever, a project manager. I know my team, and already I have some ideas, general ideas of what they like, don't like, where I need to add a little bit more information. But when I deliver something, and this is where I was coming from with my question, when I deliver something to an audience that I do not know very well, I still want to add this possibility to cater to their preference here and there, whatever they need more information or whatever I could schedule more a question and answering. Right.
Yeah, I mean, for a more, I mean, if you're delivering training content that's perhaps, over the course of a day or a couple of days, I would think about maybe making it modular and then set out perhaps the intro and the context, and perhaps at the outset say, so what's your skill level? What's your experience? Here's the content, and then get people to vote on the content, see which is the most relevant to the audience, and then put into the available time box the content that they have chosen. So you're building up the talk based on audience preference, with perhaps the core modules at the start, and then the optional, depending what the audience finds useful, slotted into the middle of it. Then again, they can see we've now built this course, and that's the way it's going to be delivered.
Yes, that's excellent. Yes, I agree.
And face-to-face, what I sometimes did is have a vertical Kanban board showing to do, doing, and done. But the to-do pile, we would order ourselves based on what people thought was most useful to cover. So it's that sort of idea, really.
Yeah, because this is what I see that nowadays, at least when you are working with a team, it's a very nice dialogue that you establish. You still deliver your content, you know, what you want them to basically to learn, but you kind of have an area where you can establish this dialogue to customize it a little bit better to the audience. Right.
And
Thank
then
you so
having
much.
built that, you've then got a deck you can then give away in this format. It wouldn't take long to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that having some, let's say, additional / optional slides where you can kind of address in advance some of the items or know these things, then yeah, we'll solve it as well. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Anyone else got any further questions? No, well, I'll just stop there then, and thank you all for attending. It's been great to speak to you, and I hope you enjoy the talk.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.